I opened my eyes to the soft glow of my phone screen lighting up in the early morning darkness. I had only just heard the faint buzz, and the room was still quiet, save for the steady rhythm of my own breath. The sudden interruption felt intrusive, but I reached for it anyway, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. There it was, clear as day, on my screen. A message from Clara, my wife of nearly 8 years. I'm leaving you and moving to Florida with my new babe. Don't bother checking our joint account because, yes, I already emptied it. Ha ha ha. I blinked, not sure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Was I reading this correctly? I stared at the words as they seemed to swim in front of me, each one more impossible than the last. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. She's gone. In that instant, it felt like the ground beneath me had just caved in. How had we reached this point? How could Clara, the woman I had built a life with, just drop a bomb like this in the dead of night? It wasn't supposed to be like this. The bed felt colder than it ever had before, and I didn't move for a long time. There was no outburst, no sudden rush of rage. My mind, instead, went numb. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my chest, drowned by the low hum of the ceiling fan above. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't try to contact me, and don't bother with the bank account. I've already emptied it. There's nothing left for you. There was no apology, no explanation, just a finality. She was gone. And then it hit me. This wasn't some petty fight or misunderstanding. This was the end of everything. The life we'd built, the love I thought we had. It was all gone, just like that. The shock was almost too much to take in. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing over the words. There was nothing in them except for finality, a cold indifference to what we had shared. And then, the laughter. That haunting, chilling ha ha ha. I didn't know how long I stared at the phone, unmoving, unblinking. Minutes felt like hours, and time itself seemed to stretch and contort. Then, my fingers moved on their own. I didn't even think twice as I typed, my words calm, almost too calm for what was happening. Good luck. I sent it, and just like that, it was over. But as I set the phone down on the nightstand, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't how I imagined it would end. There was no argument, no screaming. It was just finished. I laid back against the pillows, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It didn't seem real. I had known things weren't perfect between us. That much was clear. But never, in a million years, did I expect her to walk out like this. To leave me for another man and take everything with her. How could she think I wouldn't find out? How could she empty the account, leave without a single word of explanation, and think it would be that easy? A sick, twisted part of me knew the truth. She thought I wouldn't do anything. She thought I'd sit here, just like I always did, and let her have her way. She underestimated me. The phone buzzed again. This time, the message was short, almost taunting. I'm already on my way to the airport. I closed my eyes and tried to take a breath, but it felt like I was choking. My thoughts raced. The images of Clara with him, wherever he was, probably waiting for her on the other side of the country, somewhere warm, somewhere that didn't remind her of me. I could picture it perfectly. Clara, with that smug smile on her face, sitting beside him in some quiet, sunny corner of Florida, living the life she'd always wanted. No more me. No more us. She thinks she's won. And that's when I realized I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I sat there for a long time, lost in the darkness of the room, my mind racing. The weight of Clara's betrayal pressed down on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I could feel the anger growing inside me, but it wasn't the kind of anger that demanded action right away. No, this was quieter. It simmered, stewing, as I reflected on everything that had led to this moment. I started thinking back, thinking about all the things I had missed, all the signs that were so clearly visible now. How had I not seen them? How had I been so blind to the slow unraveling of our marriage? Clara and I had once been inseparable. We had met when I was just starting out in life. No money, no real direction, but ambition. I was a man who wanted something more, and Clara, well, she had always been the type of woman who knew what she wanted. Strong, independent, with a fire in her eyes that made me think she could conquer the world. I admired that about her. I still do, in a way. At first, everything was easy. We'd meet in little cafes, talk for hours about our dreams and hopes, share laughter and stories that felt so genuine it was as though we had always known each other. I was drawn to her, and she seemed drawn to me in return. Our chemistry was undeniable. I remember those early years like they were yesterday. The long walks in the park, the quiet dinners at home, the lazy weekends where nothing mattered except that we were together. Clara was always the life of the party. Her laughter filled every room we entered, her smile brighter than any light. She had this magnetic energy that drew people to her. And for a long time, I was her world. We got married young, thinking we had all the time in the world. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, our first home together, and set out to build a future. We both worked hard to keep our little dream alive. I poured myself into my job, climbed the ladder as quickly as I could, and started making real money. She did the same, carving out a successful career in marketing. It wasn't easy, but we had each other. Or so I thought. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. It was gradual at first, barely noticeable. The little things that we once shared, the inside jokes, the casual conversations over dinner, began to fade. We didn't fight. Not at first. It was more of a quiet drift, a slow separation that neither of us fully understood. She spent more time at work. I spent more time buried in my own ambitions. I started traveling more for business, which only made it worse. Weeks would go by where we barely spoke, and when we did, it was all about logistics, what time I'd be home, where we were going for the next event, who was picking up the dry cleaning. We were both so focused on our separate worlds that we stopped noticing the growing distance between us. But even as I became more successful, even as the house grew bigger and the bills were paid and the vacations came and went, something was missing. It wasn't about money or the house. It was about connection, about us. I didn't even see it slipping away, because every time I came home, there she was, Clara, standing by the door with her smile, always pretending that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. She wasn't the same woman I had fallen in love with. Her eyes, those once bright, eager eyes, had grown distant. I'd see it when I'd come home late from a trip, when I'd find her sitting in front of the TV, lost in a show I didn't even recognize. And when we did talk, there was a coldness in her voice, a detachment that cut deeper than any argument could. I didn't know how to reach her anymore, and I didn't know how to ask the questions that were eating away at me. Was she happy? Did she still love me? There were moments when I'd try. I'd make an effort to reconnect, to talk, to show her I still cared. I'd plan a surprise weekend away, a simple dinner at her favorite restaurant, but the effort was always met with indifference. I'd ask how her day went, and she'd give me a half-hearted answer, her gaze already elsewhere. I should have seen it then. The first warning sign. The first crack in the foundation that we had spent years building. But I let it go. I kept telling myself, she's just tired. Things will get better. This is just a phase. Then came the other man. At first, I didn't know for sure. It was the small things, the strange hours she kept, the mysterious texts, the sudden late-night meetings she never explained. She'd brush them off, tell me she was just busy, but I could feel the distance growing. It was like she was living in another world, a world I wasn't a part of anymore. One evening, I found the first real clue. I was going through her things. I shouldn't have, I know, but something in me just snapped. I saw his name on her phone. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I really looked. Simon. The name hung in the air, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to stop. It felt like someone had slapped me in the face. There was no denying it anymore. Clara, my wife, had found someone else, someone who could give her what I couldn't. And that realization crushed me. But even then, I didn't confront her. Not right away. Instead, I let the pain simmer inside me, fed by the lies and the empty spaces in our marriage. I still loved her. I wanted to believe that we could fix it, that we could go back to what we had. But I couldn't deny the truth. She had already made her decision. It wasn't until weeks later that I saw them together. I wasn't expecting it. I was out on a late-night run to pick up groceries when I saw her, laughing with him in the parking lot. Simon, the man who had taken my place. She was smiling in a way that I hadn't seen in months, maybe even years. It was then that I realized just how far gone we really were. That was the breaking point. When Clara came home later that night, I didn't say a word. I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, staring at her, my heart breaking all over again. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, was gone, replaced by someone else. And yet, I still stayed. I stayed because I didn't know what else to do. I stayed because a part of me was still holding on to the hope that we could fix it, that we could somehow turn back time. But deep down, I knew it was too late. She was already gone. I didn't know what came over me after that. It was like something in me clicked. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it quickly. I would be damned if I let her walk away with everything, if I let her destroy me without consequences. And so, I started planning. Before we continue, 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to this channel yet. Please support us by hitting the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to leave a comment below. It wasn't a decision I made overnight, nor was it one I took lightly. The rage inside me was cold and methodical now. I could feel it simmering beneath the surface, a quiet fury that demanded action. I couldn't let Clara get away with this, couldn't let her walk off into the sunset with everything we had built, without paying the price for what she had done. I had spent years providing for us, building a life, making sure everything was in place. And now, it felt like she was taking all of it, leaving me with nothing but the ruins of our marriage. It wasn't just the money, though that hurt more than I cared to admit. It was the way she had discarded me so easily, as though I was nothing. So I began to calculate. The first thing I did was take a deep breath and make sure I wasn't doing something reckless. I wasn't going to let my emotions control me. I needed to be smart, to be precise. Clara thought I was the fool, that I'd roll over and accept what she'd done. But she was wrong. I was far from the fool in this situation. I didn't act right away. No, I waited. I watched. And every moment that passed only strengthened my resolve. Every time I saw her check her phone, every time I heard her make plans with him, the man who had stolen everything I thought was mine, I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just going to get revenge. I was going to teach her a lesson about respect, about loyalty, and about not taking someone for granted. She thought she could walk away without consequences? Well, I was about to prove her wrong. I started small. I changed the passwords on all of our accounts. I knew Clara well enough to know that she wouldn't think twice about checking the bank account again to see if she had taken everything. I made sure that, even if she tried, she wouldn't find a cent. She would be left with nothing, and I would be watching from the sidelines, waiting to see how she would react. Next, I withdrew money. Not a small amount, enough to make it hurt. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about making her realize that I wasn't someone she could walk all over. If she wanted to start a new life with her babe, she'd have to do it without the safety net I had built for her. I wasn't going to let her take what was mine, not without consequences. As the days passed, the tension between Clara and I grew thicker. She started acting more distant, more detached. There were no more warm hugs when I came home. There were no more goodnight kisses. It was like we were two strangers living in the same house, avoiding each other as if we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. But I didn't move. Not yet. I let her think she had all the control. I played the part of the broken husband, the one who was crushed by her betrayal. I let her see how much she hurt me, how much she thought she had won. But I wasn't done yet. I continued watching, continuing to gather information, knowing that I needed to act at the perfect moment. And then, one night, it came. The moment I had been waiting for. I was sitting in the living room when I saw Clara's phone buzz again. Her face lit up. I didn't need to ask who it was. I had seen this before. It was him, Simon. She was always so careful with her phone, hiding it from me like I wouldn't notice. But now, I wasn't the fool anymore. I had seen enough to know what was going on. Without thinking, I walked over and snatched it up from the coffee table. Clara looked up, startled, but didn't say anything. She just watched me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and surprise. She didn't speak, didn't ask what I was doing. And I knew she was trying to hide it, trying to keep me from seeing the truth, but it was too late for that. The words on the screen were glaringly obvious. Can't wait to see you tonight. We're going to have so much fun. That was all it took. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the anger rising again. But I didn't react. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I simply handed her the phone. Is this him? I asked, my voice steady. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flickered, and I saw that familiar look of guilt, the one she thought she could hide from me. But I saw it. I saw her guilt. Yes, she finally whispered, barely audible. It was a simple admission, but it was enough to confirm everything I had suspected. She had crossed the line. She had made her choice. And now, it was my turn to make mine. I didn't wait for her to explain, didn't wait for the excuses. I stood up, turned my back to her, and walked out of the room. Clara, always the one to keep up appearances, never once questioned me as I made my way to the home office. She didn't ask where I was going or what I was doing. She didn't even try to stop me. That was the most telling part. She knew I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. She knew I had finally reached my breaking point, and I wasn't going to let her win. I pulled up the account details on my computer. The joint account, the one she thought she had cleaned out. I watched as the numbers on the screen flashed before me. She had no idea. She didn't know what I had already taken from her, what I had been planning. But I knew exactly how to hit her where it would hurt. I started transferring everything. All of it. The savings, the investments, the accounts I had set up for our future. All of it, gone. The money? It didn't matter. The damage was already done. What I was doing now was far more important. It was about control. It was about showing her that I wasn't the weak man she thought I was. I wasn't just going to let her walk away and live her new life as though I had no say in the matter. I hit confirm on the last transaction, and just like that, I had wiped her out. The satisfaction was almost overwhelming, but there was still a part of me that felt hollow. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Clara still had no idea what was coming, but she would. Soon enough, she would. I could feel the shift inside me. The calm, collected version of myself that had been watching and waiting was gone. I had crossed a line, and in that moment, everything became clearer. This was no longer about just getting even. This was about making her understand the consequences of her actions. It was about showing her that no one walks away unscathed, especially not her. Days passed, and the tension in the house grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara was still as distant as ever, but now there was a nervousness in her. She didn't know what I had done, but she felt the change. It was in the air. The way I held myself, the way I no longer waited on her hand and foot like I used to. I had withdrawn emotionally, as if I had already let her go. And I had, in a way. But I still had one final card to play. I didn't see her much anymore. She spent most of her time making calls and packing, preparing for the life she'd already decided on. I knew what she was planning. Florida, the new guy, the fresh start. It was all mapped out. And I knew she thought she was leaving me behind in the dust, walking away with everything and everyone she needed. But she was wrong. This wasn't going to be a clean break. I would make sure of it. The day she was scheduled to leave, I made sure everything was in place. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't ask her about her plans. I simply watched as she went about her business, acting like I wasn't even there. It was almost as if I was invisible to her now. It was the same routine every day. Her leaving in the morning, returning at night, the same empty conversations. She thought I was just letting her walk all over me. But today would be different. I had already been in contact with the bank, preparing for the next step. The money had been moved. The house was secure. Everything was set. The moment she thought she was free, the moment she thought she had taken everything from me, I was going to strike. She stood by the door, her suitcase packed and ready to go. The car was in the driveway, her things all loaded up, and I could see the excitement in her eyes. She was ready to leave. She was ready to start fresh, ready to walk away from everything we had. I stood there, in the doorway, watching her. For the first time in months, I saw her clearly. I saw her for what she really was. A woman who had stopped caring. A woman who had chosen herself over the man who had loved her. "You're really going through with this, huh?" I asked, my voice steady, almost emotionless. Clara froze. She turned slowly to face me, and I saw the brief flicker of fear in her eyes. She had been expecting an argument, a fight. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not today. I'm doing what I need to do, she said, her voice cold, defensive. I didn't say anything. I just walked past her, calmly, almost casually, and made my way toward the kitchen. She followed me, confused, her eyes darting between me and the door. I could hear her footsteps behind me, quick and unsure. "What are you doing?" she asked, but I ignored her, my mind focused on the task ahead. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the key to the safe. The safe that had all of our financial records, our important documents, and the things she thought she could take with her when she left. Clara's face went pale as she saw the key in my hand. Her eyes widened, and I saw the panic start to set in. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked again, her voice trembling this time. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I walked over to the safe, inserted the key, and opened it. Inside, there was nothing. The shelves were empty. Her face drained of color as she realized what I had done. Her hands shook as she reached for the space where the documents and cash had once been. "Where's everything?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I moved it," I said, turning to face her. "Everything is gone. I made sure you wouldn't take anything from me." Her breath hitched as she took a step back, her face contorting with disbelief. What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to hold herself together, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching her panic. The woman who had been so confident in her decision to leave, the woman who thought she could take everything and leave me with nothing, was now standing in front of me, completely vulnerable. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she unlocked it. She started furiously typing, probably trying to call Simon, trying to figure out what to do next, but it was too late. I had already made sure her access to the account was gone. Every penny she thought was hers, gone. Every secret she thought she could hide, exposed. She looked at me, her face twisted with anger and confusion. "You think this is funny? You think this is some kind of game?" I shook my head slowly, my expression hardening. "No, this isn't a game, Clara. This is me showing you what happens when you think you can walk away with everything. You think you can just take my love, my money, and my life, and leave me with nothing. Well, I'm not letting you have it. Not anymore." Her anger flared. She took a step toward me, her hands clenched into fists. "You can't do this. You don't have the right. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do," I interrupted coldly. "You had every chance to make things right. You could have talked to me. You could have told me the truth, but you didn't. So now, I'm doing what I need to do." Her breath came in short gasps as she looked at the empty safe, the reality of her situation sinking in. For the first time, I saw the real fear in her eyes. The fear of losing everything. The fear of realizing that she had underestimated me. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm done." I watched as she turned and walked toward the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. She stopped just before she opened it, and for a brief moment, I saw something in her eyes, something that looked almost like regret. But it was too late. She had made her choice. She had already made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She just opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving me standing there, the echoes of her departure ringing in my ears. I didn't chase after her. I didn't need to. The moment she walked out that door, I knew it was over. For her. And for me. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. I had won this battle, but I still had one last thing to do. One last thing to make sure she knew exactly what she had lost. The door slammed behind Clara as she left, and the sound reverberated through the house, an undeniable symbol of finality. She was gone. In that moment, there was a quiet calm that settled over me. The storm that had been raging inside me for months had finally passed, leaving only the bitter remnants of what once was. But now, with everything in place, I had to make sure she understood. It wasn't about the money, the revenge, or the pride. It was about clarity. She needed to understand the gravity of her choices. The consequences were much deeper than she thought. So much more than just a few withdrawals from the bank. I could feel the coldness that had been festering inside me for months finally releasing. I didn't feel victorious, not exactly. There was no joy in watching her walk out of the door, leaving behind everything we had built. There was no satisfaction in knowing I had taken everything she thought was hers. Instead, I felt a hollow emptiness in my chest, as though something vital had been ripped away. I sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. My hands were still shaking slightly, but it wasn't from anger. It was from the weight of everything that had just happened. The weight of finally letting go of the woman I thought I knew, the woman I once loved. The phone buzzed again. It was Clara. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She had no idea what I had done. No idea that I had taken everything. Every ounce of control, every shred of dignity she thought she could take with her. I knew she was probably sitting in her new place, thinking everything was falling into place for her. But it wasn't. And that was the most powerful feeling I had. Knowing she was out there, completely unaware of how thoroughly I had wiped the slate clean. Hours passed. The house was eerily quiet now. There were no more arguments, no more fights, no more lies. Just silence. The kind of silence that fills the spaces between breaths and makes you realize just how much you've lost. I had let go of her. But in that process, I realized I had also let go of myself. The person I had become, the man who had fought so hard to keep it all together, was gone too. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I had been so focused on getting back at Clara that I had forgotten about the man I was before all of this. I had forgotten about the version of me who had dreams, who had passions, who had hopes that didn't revolve around someone else's betrayal. I needed to rebuild, and this time, it would be for me. I couldn't keep running after the past, after the woman who had walked away. It was over, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let it be. Days passed. I didn't hear from Clara. I could feel her absence in every corner of the house. She had been a part of this space for so long that even her absence felt overwhelming. But as the days turned into weeks, something changed. Something within me shifted. The pain of losing her, of losing what I thought was my life, slowly began to fade. And in its place, I found something unexpected. I found myself. Not the broken version of me that had been drowning in anger and hurt, but the man I had once been. Strong, independent, focused on his own future. I started working on things I had neglected for so long. The projects I had put on hold, the hobbies I used to love, the life that had been overshadowed by Clara's presence. I began to breathe again, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt like I was finally starting to live again. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for a message from her. I stopped wondering what she was doing, who she was with. I stopped looking back, and as I let go of that attachment to her, I started to see the world with new eyes. I was no longer the man who had been betrayed, the man who had been crushed by a woman who didn't love him anymore. I was me again, the person I had been before I lost myself in the chaos of that toxic relationship. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instant. There were moments when I felt weak, when I wondered if I had made the right decision. I still had questions. I still had doubts. But as time went on, the answers came less frequently. And I started accepting that I might never have the answers I wanted. And that was okay. Then, one evening, as I was settling in after a long day, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there she was. Clara. She stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock, and the faintest trace of something like guilt etched across her features. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, taking in the sight of the woman who had once meant everything to me. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't let her in immediately. Instead, I just stood there, weighing my options. I could slam the door in her face, tell her to leave and never come back. I could shout at her, demand answers, or I could listen. I could hear her out. After all, there was nothing left to lose. I opened the door wider, allowing her in. We sat across from each other, the tension between us thick and heavy. Clara's eyes darted nervously from the floor to my face, unsure of how to begin. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. I hurt you, and I know that now. I I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if you ever will. I could see it in her eyes. The remorse, the regret. But there was something else there too, something deeper. It wasn't just guilt, it was something more complicated. It was the realization that her actions had destroyed more than just our marriage. They had destroyed her too. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, my voice steady, but firm. But I can't keep holding on to this anger. It's eating me up inside. I'm done being angry at you, Clara. I'm done with everything that's been holding me back. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had let go of the anger, of the resentment. I wasn't going to let her, or anyone, control my future anymore. Clara reached out, her hand trembling, and I watched her, wondering if this was the moment when everything would finally come crashing down again. But it didn't. She didn't expect anything from me, and I didn't owe her anything anymore. We sat in silence, just breathing, letting the moment settle between us. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping gestures of forgiveness. But there was something I hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The silence that had filled the room was no longer suffocating. It was freeing. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the clouds begin to part and the first rays of sunlight start to break through. In that moment, I realized that for all the pain, for all the anger and betrayal, I was finally free. Clara sat across from me, still unsure of what to say next. She had confessed, admitted her wrongs, and there was nothing more for her to prove. She had laid herself bare before me, not expecting anything in return but an acknowledgement of her guilt. And I had given her that. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if I'd ever fully understand why she'd done what she did, or if I'd ever be able to forgive her completely. But I didn't need to. In that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had let go. I had let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long, and in doing so, I had freed myself. I'm sorry, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I never meant to hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day you'll find it in your heart to at least understand why I did it. I met her gaze and nodded. It wasn't the kind of forgiveness she might have wanted, but it was all I could give. The truth was, forgiveness wasn't something I had to give her. It was something I had to give myself. It was something I needed in order to move forward. I don't know if I can ever fully understand why you did it, Clara, I said, my voice steady, but I don't need to. I don't need to hold on to this pain anymore. You hurt me, and that's something I'll never forget. But I'm moving forward, and I'm not carrying this anger with me anymore. It's too heavy. I saw a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't the first time I had seen her cry, but this time, there was something different in the way she cried. It wasn't the guilt-ridden tears from before. It was the kind of tears that come when someone realizes they've lost something they'll never get back. She wiped her eyes quickly, standing up. I'll go. I know I don't belong here anymore. I watched her for a moment, considering the woman who had once been my everything. She wasn't that woman anymore. She had changed, and so had I. We had both been irrevocably altered by the events that had unfolded. And now, it was time for us both to move on. I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara, I said, standing up as well. I really do. But we can't go back. Not to who we were. And that's okay. We've both changed. And that's what we need to accept. She nodded, her face softening. Goodbye, she said quietly, turning toward the door. I watched her leave. She didn't look back, and I didn't ask her to. I had done everything I needed to do. I had confronted my pain, and I had let go. There was nothing left for me to hold on to. As the door clicked shut behind her, I took a deep breath. The air felt different now, lighter. I was standing in a space that was no longer clouded by the shadows of betrayal. I had faced the darkness and come out the other side. In the days that followed, life began to find its rhythm again. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful. I found myself spending more time doing things that made me happy, things I had put off for far too long. I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years, and I found a strange sense of satisfaction in pushing myself physically. I began reading again, books that had once brought me comfort and peace, and I rediscovered parts of myself I had forgotten about. The world outside my house was still the same, but I had changed, and that made all the difference. There were moments, of course, when the memories of Clara came rushing back. There were times when I'd catch myself wondering where she was, or what she was doing, but those moments grew fewer and fewer. The anger and pain faded into the background, replaced by a sense of calm. The weight of the past slowly lifted, and I realized that I was no longer defined by my relationship with Clara. I was defined by who I chose to be moving forward. It wasn't an easy process. There were days when I wanted to scream, when I wanted to throw everything I had worked for into the wind and walk away from it all. But I didn't. I stayed. I fought. I didn't let her actions or my own pain determine my future. I decided that my future would be mine to create. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I started reaching out to old friends, people I had neglected during the dark days of my marriage. I reconnected with family members I hadn't spoken to in far too long. Slowly, I began to rebuild my world, brick by brick, making it something I could be proud of again. And then one evening, as I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, something remarkable happened. I felt a genuine sense of peace wash over me. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting the past, but the kind that comes from accepting it. I had made my mistakes, and so had Clara. But I wasn't going to let those mistakes define me. The future was wide open, filled with possibilities. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but for the first time in ages, I wasn't afraid. I had faced my demons, and I had come out stronger on the other side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the sky, I felt the weight of everything that had happened finally lift from my shoulders. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole again. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled.